Warning: this video contains historical images and discussion of death, including photographs of deceased individuals from the Victorian era. These images are presented for educational and historical purposes, not for shock value. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I know it's been a while since you've last seen me, but I've really been going through it. So my Uncle Edmund recently passed away, RIP Uncle Eddie, and my Aunt Ada, his wife, has really been going through it, guys. So she wants the family to get together and get this family portrait done with Uncle Eddie. And at first I was like, what are you talking about? Like, Uncle Eddie is dead. I mean, I know you're going through grief and all of that, but hello? So at first I thought she was talking about like when Aunt Beatrice died, where we got a family painting done and the painter just, put her in there. But no, apparently we're getting a daguerreotype done. I think that's what it's called, a daguerreotype. So anyway, for this video, I am going to do a get ready with me for our family's daguerreotype portrait with deceased Uncle Eddie. I figured I'd talk about it while I'm getting ready. So I'm going to start with a little primer. So apparently a daguerreotype is like a super fancy mirror that traps your soul, but tastefully. Crazy, right? It's like the newest technology in France, I hear. And it just made its way over to us across the pond. And you can actually see yourself, like your reflection, like you see in a mirror. But you see yourself, get this, on a piece of metal. Isn't that crazy? And I hear it's super expensive, but it is still cheaper than getting a painting done, which is pretty cool. But my family has money, so it really doesn't matter. But for you guys out there, if you're interested in getting a portrait done on a piece of metal and you're looking for more affordable options, daguerreotype might be the route you want to go. And I was told by Aunt Ada that I have to sit super still for a couple minutes or up to an hour, guys. What if I get a cramp? I still have my reservations. I don't know about all this. This is really cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. So please feel free to leave them in the comments. Have you had a daguerreotype done yet? And if so, what was your experience like? Were you afraid? I guess my biggest reservation is, what if it captures my soul? Truly terrifying thoughts have been running through my head since Auntie Ada told us about this family portrait, this daguerreotype business. Now I'm coming in with a little foundation. We're just gonna pack that in. I was thinking at first that I would go with a full beat for this look. Now some of this translucent powder stuff. God, I wonder what cousin Etta is gonna look like. She's always competing with me. She can't help it. I mean, when you look this good, right? Flawless as usual. Put a little rosiness here. I do want to look alive, unlike Uncle Eddie. So now, final touches, we'll just do a little bit of setting spray. And now all that's left is for me to get dressed and show you guys the final look. And now time for the final accoutrements. Perfect. What do we think? For this look, I thought I'd go for something more soft, somber. A little bit of mourning, but also a little bit of I'm still hot even when I'm grieving. Anyway, guys, this was so much fun. Thank you for watching. I have a family portrait to get to. Bye-bye for now. Hello there. Welcome to my channel, Old Dirty History, where I like to talk about whatever historic person, topic, place, or event that I want to talk about. I thought it would be a good idea to dive into a topic that is both beautiful but kind of creepy at the same time, and that is Victorian death photography. And if you've never heard of Victorian death photography, I'm referring to a time in Western history when people took portraits of their deceased loved ones, sometimes lovingly posed right beside inside them. And it sounds unsettling, especially to modern sensibilities, but honestly, it was pretty normal back then. I don't know. In my opinion, it's kind of poetic. But before we get into things, please like and share the video, and hey, why not subscribe? I think in order to better understand Victorian death photography, we should talk a little bit about the Victorian era itself. The Victorian era was a period in Western history that lasted from 1837 to 1901, and it was named after Queen Victoria, who reigned over the British Empire for over 60 years. And even though the Victorian era was named after Queen Victoria and centered in Britain, its influence spread far beyond it. Through trade, migration, and the reach of the British Empire, Victorian culture shaped much of the Western world, including America. The fashions, architecture, and even mourning customs all crossed the Atlantic. And of the 60 years that Queen Victoria ruled, she was wearing black in probably about half of those years. And her influence, stretched far and wide, and she practically made mourning attire a fashion statement. So while Americans weren't Victorian subjects, they were still heavily influenced by British culture. And this is especially among the middle and upper class. They looked to England for fashion, literature, etiquette, including moral values. The US had broken from British rule, but culturally, it still mirrored a lot of Victorian ideals like the strict gender roles, obsession with respectability, moral restraint, as well as an interest in domestic life and mourning customs. Death was an inescapable part of Victorian life. They were up against a plethora of diseases like diphtheria, typhus, cholera, measles, scarlet fever, as well as rubella. And couple that with lackluster healthcare during this time, death was no stranger to people living during this era. And it was common for people to retain trinkets or mementos that represent their loved ones that passed away, like a lock of hair that could be worn inside of a locket or fashioned as a ring. There were also death masks that were created from wax, and also symbols of death appeared in paintings as well as sculptures. Some had miniature paintings made into lockets or pins that people could wear. Death was everywhere, and it makes sense because during the Victorian era, roughly 40 to 50% of children wouldn't make it past the age of 5. And it just so happens that right before the start of the Victorian era, photography was born. And so the 19th century gave us two obsessions: taking pictures and dying. And naturally, people found a way to combine the two. In 1826, a French inventor named Joseph Nicephore Niepce successfully captured and fixed the first permanent image using a camera. The process was groundbreaking but far from efficient. Exposures could take anywhere from a couple of minutes to over an hour, requiring the subject of the photograph to sit for an extended period of time very still. And because of this, sometimes when you look at these old photographs, you'll notice that the person in the picture appears to be very blurry. And that's because it's impossible for a person to sit very still like that for an extended period of time. Well, unless you're dead. And this becomes even more jarring when you see these post-mortem photographs that include living subjects as well as dead subjects. Take this photograph, for example. It's clear which subject is dead because of how crisp and in focus she is versus how blurry the other two people are. It's a little creepy, but kind of cool. It wasn't the most efficient process, but Niepce's work marked the beginning of a new way to preserve moments in time, which was revolutionary. After Niepce's death, his associate, Louis Daguerre, continued developing the technology and introduced the daguerreotype process in 1839. And it was the first method of photography that was both publicly announced and commercially viable. And unlike Niepce's earlier experiments, the daguerreotype only required a few minutes of exposure, and it produced clear, finely detailed images on polished metal plates. For the first time, people could see themselves as well as their loved ones in astonishing accuracy, not through the interpretation of a painter, but their actual likeness. It changed how people thought about memory, legacy, and what it meant to capture life. I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like to see something captured in a still frame, and for the first time. That had to have been the most trippy, mind-blowing thing. Now, as cool as it was, not everybody was on board with photography when it first came out. Some people saw it as blasphemous, an art form that tried to do the work of God by capturing what only the divine was meant to create, life itself. And some people thought cameras were just downright dangerous. 19th century French novelist and playwright Honoré de Balzac, and yes, his name is de Balzac. I am a child. He was convinced that photography stripped away a thin layer of your being, like a spiritual exfoliation. He believed each picture took a little piece of your soul until there was nothing left. It sounds wild now, but I can kind of see where Balzac is coming from, especially when I think about the modern day and AI and the direction it's been going in. It's exciting, interesting, but also a little scary, a lot scary. This was the first time people had ever seen their faces frozen in time, and not a replication of it in paint or a sculpture or a death mask, but their actual likeness captured. If you had never seen a photo before and suddenly someone just showed you your reflection on a piece of metal, you'd probably be a little freaked out too. To some people, it felt like a miracle, but to others, a little witchcrafty. As I've already mentioned, prior to photography, if someone wanted to pay for a dead loved one's likeness to be replicated, they'd get a painting done. But paintings were hella expensive, but photography made capturing the likeness of dead loved ones more accessible to everyday people because it was more affordable than a painting. That isn't to say that it wasn't pricey in its own right. At first, daguerreotypes were considered a luxury. Again, more affordable than paintings, but still on the pricey side. But as more photographers entered into the field, competition grew and the cost of a sitting gradually dropped, allowing the middle class to participate in what had once been reserved for the wealthy. I don't know about people who live below the poverty line. Probably not. They probably had more important things to worry about financially. By the 1850s, the process became even more accessible with the introduction of newer techniques that used cheaper materials like paper, thin metal, and glass instead of silver-coated plates. Because child mortality was tragically high during the 19th century, many post-mortem photographs featured children. Sometimes they were alone, and sometimes they're posed with living family members. And in many cases, this would be the only photograph ever taken of the deceased child throughout their entire lifetime. Creating a portrait after death became a way for grieving families to preserve a likeness they never had the chance to capture in life, a final image to remember, to mourn, and to hold on to when nothing else remained. And it wasn't just people who were photographed in death, family pets as well. Just like many of us today, including myself, Victorians formed close bonds with their family pets and considered them part of their family. For some, photographing a pet after its passing was a final act of love, a way to honor that companionship and preserve it even in death. Photographers during the 19th century went through great lengths to make their deceased subjects appear alive and as lifelike as possible in these images. Positioning the body was an important part of the process, and it required both technical skill and sensitivity. Depending on how the body stiffened after death, photographers used a range of props and supports to hold the subject in place. Objects like pillows to brace the back or head, wooden blocks to steady chairs, and stands or hidden frames to keep the subject upright. Small adjustments in posture, a tilt of the head, a hand resting on a book or a toy helped create a sense of familiarity for the family. It reminded them of when their deceased loved one was still alive. Sometimes the photographer would pose children next to their most beloved toys or other personal items. And post-mortem photographs that included tangible objects associated with the deceased helped to keep their memory vivid and emotionally present. In these photographs, every detail was intentional. The goal wasn't to shock or cause discomfort. It was to comfort the family in their grief by capturing the person as they were remembered. Now this part I find kind of creepy. Sometimes eyes were painted on top of the subject's eyelids to make them appear awake when their eyes were closed. And honestly, I don't know if it's because of the quality of the image and it being so old, but in some of these pictures where the eyes are painted on, I personally found it hard to be able to tell that they were painted on. That's either some good ass eye painting or I just have really bad vision.
Oh my God.
And this might be totally random, but when I was thinking about the eye painting, I was wondering what that conversation would have been like between the photographer and the family that's paying for the post-mortem photo. Yeah, it's gonna be an extra $30 if you want to get some eyes painted on. But they didn't always have eyes painted on the lids when the eyes were closed. Sometimes the families preferred for their eyes to look closed, to give it that vibe of them being asleep, especially with child subjects. Sometimes it'll be a picture of a mother or father holding their infant child and their eyes will be closed, so it appears as they're just, cradling their child to sleep. Another type of post-mortem photography was open casket group photographs. These were often taken as part of the funeral or burial services in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were frequently taken in an indoor viewing area outside the church where the funeral service was held or at the burial site. Just like with me not being able to identify when the eyelids are painted on, identifying post-mortem photography isn't always easy. Some images that appear at first glance to show the deceased may actually be ordinary, living, breathing subjects. As I mentioned, the long exposure times of early photography required that the subjects sit for extended periods of time. And this unnatural sitting could even make somebody alive appear kind of lifeless, a little stiff. And that makes sense because I often wondered when I would look at old photographs during this period, why the people just look dead inside. And no disrespect, you know what I'm talking about. You look at these pictures and you compare them to, say, maybe a modern photograph where, someone's like, and then you look at these old photographs and they're like, and that's because who the hell is staying like this for an hour? I wouldn't. When I thought about it from that perspective, I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's why they look so dead inside. In addition to, posing like you're dead inside, throw in some painted eyes and propping support objects and living family members, and it makes it all the more harder to be able to differentiate between the living from the dead in these images. So without clear visual cues, it can be difficult to tell whether a photograph captured a moment of life or death. As I mentioned, people during this era were well acquainted with death. Way more than we are today. It wasn't something that happened behind hospital walls. It happened right at home. I mean, death, of course, happens still anywhere, anytime, but it isn't something that's in our faces at all times. I mean, just one example, before embalming became a regular practice, the families had to handle everything themselves when a loved one passed away. They washed the body, dressed it, and laid their loved ones out for viewing, and usually in their family home's parlor. And that's actually where the term funeral parlor comes from, because before there were funeral homes, people used their own homes. But by the early 1900s, all that started to change. The rise of the funeral industry, the shift towards sanitization, improved healthcare, and hospitals took death out of the house and out of sight. What used to be a family's final act of care became something managed by professionals. And this actually reminds me of a family story that my mother shared with me when I was a child. My grandfather passed away when my mother was just 13 years old, so I never got the chance to meet him. And this was back during the early 1960s. And she told me that after the undertaker took his body, cleaned him up, embalmed him, did all the things, they returned him in his coffin to our family. And he was placed in the family home's living room for the viewing until his funeral. And for about a week, my family lived with him. They grieved his passing with him in the home. And my mother, she told me that late at night, she would go into the living room and she would just sit by him for hours and she would just talk to him. And one night she actually grabbed a keepsake off of his person. It was, there were a couple of pictures in his wallet of him and my grandmother. Pictures that had she not taken would have been lost forever once he was buried. So even during the early to mid 20th century, some of these older practices around death, they still lingered and still do across different cultures and different regions. When death moved out of everyday life, so did the need to photograph it. Post-mortem portraits started to feel old-fashioned and even unsettling. The world was modernizing and people wanted wanted to remember the living, not preserve the dead. And as photography got cheaper and easier, it also got more personal. By the early 1900s, companies like Kodak made cameras simple enough for everyone to use. You no longer need a photographer or a fancy setup. You could just take pictures of your family, your friends, and your life as it was happening. And that changed everything because now people already had photos of their loved ones. There was no need to capture their likeness in that final moment after they had passed. We're now taking pictures of loved ones as they're alive, laughing, celebrating, living, just being themselves. We're now capturing these precious moments like that wedding, that birth of a child, graduations, special get-togethers. That need to keep someone close even after they're gone, it never really went away. It just found new forms. Instead of hiring photographers, which I mean, some of us still do, but instead of having to, we can now just snap quick pictures using our smartphones. Now, if you're interested in learning more about post-mortem photography, you can check out the Burns Archive. It's one of the largest collections of historical photographs in the world, and it has an incredible range of 19th century post-mortem and mourning images. And many of the images have been digitized and are available online. The archive was originally a private collection created by Dr. Stanley Burns, who was an ophthalmologist and professor who spent decades collecting and preserving over 1 million photographs that document how people have dealt with death, medicine, and memory over time. And a lot of what we know about Victorian mourning culture comes from his collection. However, just a warning, if you choose to explore the collection, please be aware that some of these images can be very disturbing, even more so than the ones that I've already shared. In this video, I've only shared post-mortem photography, but the Burns Archive also includes images related to various different ailments, medical procedures, and just, people suffering from a lot of serious illnesses. And, ethically speaking, particularly relating to the images of people who were dealing with various different medical issues and procedures, were probably taken without the consent of the subject or their families. I mean, this is the nature of history, as well as archives to begin with. In many cases, the people in these images were marginalized, come from lower socioeconomic background, some were institutionalized, and therefore we can assume in many cases that they did not get the permission of the subject or the subject's family members. Today, these photographs are valuable historical records of the past, but they force us to think about who gets remembered, who gets say in how their images are used, and so just something to keep in mind. Anyway, that concludes this video, and if you haven't already, please like and share and subscribe to the channel, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Oh my God, bro. I don't know how content creators do get ready with me is this is hard. Focus. How the f do people do this shit? How do people do this shit? Nah, man, I am not even going to attempt that shit. Kudos to people who do makeup on this platform because it ain't for me. And now for the final look. I should have done that from the jump. Oh God, did I make it dirty? Shit. Let me clean that shit. I made my shit dirty. It's all gross now. Ew.